Right, just organise myself here. New glasses. Must be all the changes at Australia Council that must have sent me to get my eyes done. Uncle Lewis, wonderful to see you again. Uncle Lewis and I have been long-term colleagues. Kira, lovely to hear and meet you and hear the language that you're speaking. Tricia, Jane, Annabelle, Helen, South Australian state colleagues, Australia Council colleagues, and I know there are many of you in this audience. I'd also like to extend apologies from our chair, Rupert Meyer, who's currently overseas, heading back today, but he certainly looks forward to hearing some of the feedback that comes through. So what is a successful collaboration? I was recently on a flight, on the many flights that I catch these days, and I just watched a documentary called Risk on Julian Assange. So I thought, I'll look up WikiLeaks and see what WikiLeaks says. So collaboration is a purposeful relationship in which all parties strategically choose to cooperate in order to achieve shared or overlapping objectives. Uncle Lewis talked about Kaurna people and the conferencing that happens on the Adelaide Plains for millennia. The Pitjantjatjara people talk about Nappaji Nappaji, a term that is a reciprocal exchange and engagement. So I'll just leave that with you. According to my friend and colleague, the chair of the ATSIA strategy panel, Wesley Enoch, to Indigenous Australians, collaboration is cultural values of which are embedded into our very beings. They represent a millennia of trial and error, testing the bond between humanity and this landscape. We have collaborated and expressed ourselves through our song, dance, storytelling, visual arts, music and craft. Our genealogy, geography, history, economy, legal system and sense of community comes from expressing ourselves through our culture. We have both a moral authority, gifted to us through our heritage, the history of injustice and continued connection with this landscape, and we have the solutions that are based on the concept of putting the arts and cultural expression in the centre of society. As I reflect on this question and Australia's Council's up-and-coming 50th anniversary of the then Prime Minister Harold Holt, I wondered what were the critical steps that got us here talking about collaborating with Indigenous peoples in the arts. It would be remiss of me not to bring to your attention a number of key policies which are focused on protecting the rights of Australia's First Peoples. The protection of traditional cultural expression and traditional knowledge is not just a challenge for Indigenous Australians, but a global issue for all First Peoples around the world. There are a range of global policies, laws and principles of international law for all people focused on protecting the rights of Indigenous people. So we know, and most of you do know, that there's been WIPO, that there's a South Pacific community that has, through the UNESCO, that's looked at traditional knowledge and expression and the protection of that, the United Nations and the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So in Australia over the past 4 to 5 decades, a number of key policy areas have been identified and developed domestically and internationally to ensure the right to protect Indigenous tradition, expressions and knowledges. So in the 1970s we saw the whole thing around self-determination. We saw the historic Mabo decision, and that self-determination is an ongoing process of choice to ensure that Indigenous communities are able to meet their social, cultural, economic needs, and importantly, it's not about creating a separate Indigenous state. The loss of this right to live according to a set of common values and beliefs and to have the right respected by others is at the heart of the current disadvantage experienced by Indigenous Australians. Self-determination is not possible for Indigenous Australians to fully overcome the legacy of colonisation and dispossession. We then had reconciliation based on Indigenous and non-Indigenous coming together in an honest understanding of our shared history, a commitment to build cooperative partnerships based on trust and respect, and a recognition of the distinctive rights of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples. We saw the 2020 summit and, you know, the response that stated that Indigenous culture was a critical part of Australia's identity and that strengthening it is a core element of sustaining a strong Indigenous community. Closing the Gap came next, and so Closing the Gap wants to look at building on the strength of Indigenous cultures and identity, reduce social exclusion of Indigenous people by promoting a support of a strong positive view of Australians, of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but also that we meet the cultural needs of Indigenous people, focus on eliminating overt and systematic discrimination, and ensure that governments have the cultural competency and cultural awareness to implement programs effectively. So how does this impact the way in which we do our business in the arts? The work of the Australia Council has been central to the seeding of and today's success of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander arts. For 50 years, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Board have, and from the principle of arm's length from government, determine the policies and principles by which the sector would create and engage its arts and audiences. I think we've done a pretty good job at doing this. But it's also an example of success in collaboration at a national level and is a testament to the respect towards these principles I'm just highlighting in terms of policies of the past. Because without this, we would have bureaucrats running around determining the frameworks of our art and culture. And if I can be so bold in saying doing this is probably an act of assimilation, so that's another policy of thousands that have impacted Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people over the years. As Indigenous Australians, we occupy a unique leadership position in this country. We think of ourselves as providing leadership within our communities, but I believe we can provide greater leadership to the whole country. The right to self-determination is based on the simple acknowledgement that Indigenous peoples are Australia's first people, recognised by law in the historic Mabo judgment. It is to ensure that Indigenous communities are able to meet their, and as I said, social, cultural and economic base. Without self-determination, it's not possible for Indigenous Australians to fully overcome the legacy of colonisation and dispossession. The ATSIA board found many organisations coming to council wanting to collaborate with Indigenous artists and organisations. I was the chairwoman of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Arts Board before council changed and reviewed its structure. However, we had problems with this. Organisations wanting to access black money, to tick a box, to say that they had engaged with the community. One-off projects without growth, without sustainability, or even embedding First Peoples into their programs and organisations. We needed to create a framework that provided a cultural shift in the sector. Making Solid Ground review was implemented and an accredited partner to the ATSIA board under the National Indigenous Arts Infrastructure program was delivered. So we had created two areas: an infrastructure that had a strategic partner and an infrastructure that created an affiliate partner for a non-Indigenous organisation. The board considered submissions and issue accreditations to selected organisations at its meetings. Carclew was one of those organisations, of which I'm very proud to say we got a gold star. I worked here for 11 years, so I know the youth arts sector very well. The program included a range of Indigenous and non-Indigenous arts organisations that were not funded through our program, but also recognised that being vital infrastructure organisations that contribute to the sustainability and growth of Indigenous arts and culture, just as Carclew has been. The program moved the sector beyond just a funding relationship. Essentially, a sustainable approach to Indigenous arts infrastructure requires more than funding categories. While the funding categories remain a core component of the infrastructure development, a number of other essential supports were and still continue to be developed at an Australia Council level. I had slides, but I know I'm going to go over time, so if you want to know more about this program, I can lead you to the right way. But, you know, it involved governance, ultimately strategic planning, finance, workforce development, marketing, philanthropy, national dialogues for arts policies, for Indigenous arts policies at a national level, networking, information exchange, cultural brokering, mentoring, absolutely vital for our sector, and ultimately strategic partnerships across all major institutions and communities. I'll bypass that one. Stop. Okay. Okay, just let me... can I just finalise by saying that, and just bear with me, that working in the Indigenous arts space is a wonderful, rewarding, enriching space. This place of culture and art making is a demonstration of true leadership by our community and groups of individuals like senior cultural bosses. It's built confidence and I think a great strength to the Australian community. And it's also a way of the way in which we go about our business, our cultural business, but also building a new way of embracing our cultural heritage to our modern lives. Imagine a world where we teach our Parliament how to respect elders better, and I'm quoting Wesley Enoch here, to create a council of elders and that oversees the moral development of our nation. Imagine what we have to teach the country in terms of environmental protection and use, how to think about the change in terms of multi-generational achievements. Imagine a parliament that dictated gender equality so that men and women's business could be discussed fairly. Putting the arts in the centre of the country's cultural practices, family structures, welcoming visitors, just as Uncle Lou has, and even the amazing things we have achieved in our recent history around family-based health initiatives. And I'll just jump. But finally, today, those who are receiving the opportunity to build their leadership skills in this space, and those who have already done it over the past number of decades, I'd like to challenge you to see this invitation of this structure of a true collaborative platform is what we have to offer to you. And that what we have to learn and what we are teaching is a reversal of colonial and cultural norms. So what I'm offering is that as we go through today, that we think about, we have those solutions here, and if we choose to listen to each other and not muscle power within that, we are going to be in for a wonderful Australian society in the future. Thank you.